Hi all, lovely to see you. I'm Dr. Karen Gurney, a clinical psychologist and psychosexologist, both for the NHS and also for the Havelock Clinic, an independent sexual problem service based in London. This basically means that I do therapy with individuals and couples, but everything I do is specialised around sex. It's the most incredible job out there, I think, and it's such a privilege to be able to help people get the sex life that they want. I've been doing this job for about 17 years and it never gets boring. I've also been researching and designing online interventions to help people have better sex for the last 10 years. And we put all of this into some online workshops at the Havelock Clinic around things like training your brain for better sex and desire in long-term relationships. Also this year, my first book came out. It is here, Mind the Gap, The Truth About Desire and How to Future-Proof Your Sex Life, which is a book for women and their partners who want to understand the science of how desire works and how to harness it. Now, it's a book for all women, not just straight women, as many sex therapy books unfortunately can be. And I chose desire particularly, and a book for women especially, as concerns about desire for sex is widely known to be the most common sexual concern across the world, with 34% of women in the UK describing a lack of interest in sex lasting 3 months or more in the past year in some of the large-scale research that's been done in the UK. And it's a book for women as so much of sex is about gender politics and how women are socialized to be sexually. And much of this can threaten women's sex lives. And this is something that I'm super passionate about. So my plan for this session is to give you some of the big headlines. Firstly, about how desire works and doesn't work. And then to move on to what makes sex different for women having sex with women, and what particular opportunities and also areas of risk for sexual problems are around for the sex lives of women who have sex with women. And lastly, what's the impact of lockdown on all of this? And how can we use this to our advantage? And I'll finish with some thoughts about those of you who are currently not in lockdown with someone else in terms of like a sexual partner, as of course your sex life matters just as much. Okay, so let's pull apart some common myths that are bad for our sex life. Number one, you should feel like sex out of the blue for your long-term partner frequently, and good sex should just happen if you love each other. So take a second to reflect on this. At this moment in time, how much do you believe this idea? It would surprise me if you don't believe it strongly, even if it's not happening for you. Everything around us speaks to this idea. Films and TV perpetuate it. Everyone who comes to see me for sex therapy believes it. It's literally everywhere. But it's not the truth. Now, I spend much of my working week with couples who, no matter how much they love each other, feel their sex life isn't quite hitting the mark. And the issue, they tell me, is that the desire they feel for one another is not as present as they think it should be. And this has started to feel like a looming disaster in their relationship. The problem here is that we've been socialized to understand sexual desire as a drive, a feeling that you have out of the blue to want to rip someone's clothes off. And it's true that as humans, we do experience such feelings, and more so in the early months of a relationship. But this is certainly not the only way humans experience desire, and definitely not the most common way for many people in a long-term relationship. For example, when sex scientists have asked women how often they feel like sex out of the blue with their long-term partner, a large proportion say, well, never or almost never. And in fact, women report this so often that we now consider it normal for women to never feel like sex out of the blue in a long-term relationship. I know it sounds odd to say it, but never feeling like sex does not mean that there's a problem with your desire. So it's important to know then that in a long-term relationship, many women don't feel like sex ever out of the blue, but instead need to have their desire triggered. Now, these are the women who say to me in therapy, I never feel like having sex, but when we do, it's great. And I say to my partner, we should do that more often. This is basically a normal manifestation of desire in a long-term relationship, and not feeling like it ever from the outset is not something to worry about. The problem is that we've been socialized to believe that lust will come out of the blue and will knock us for six. So many people sit and wait for this feeling, which rather frustratingly for them and sometimes for their partner, never appears, even in the absence of a brilliant relationship. So in that case, how did we arrive at this unhelpful understanding of how desire is? Well, our societal expectations of desire and telling us that desire operates in this way, that concept trickled down from the findings of sex science in the middle of the last century. And we had pioneers such as Kinsey and Masters and Johnson making headlines around that time in the 50s and 60s with the study of human sexuality and how sex worked. And the popular view of that time was that desire came first, before our bodies became aroused or before we got involved in anything sexual. And when I speak to my clients for therapy, I hear the practical legacy of this old societal understanding. They say things like, we don't kiss passionately other than as part of sex, or I never feel like it, so I avoid going to bed at the same time as them because I don't want to give them the wrong idea. Now, even though Masters and Johnson studied both men and women's sexual response in their lab, they ended up with a model of human sexual functioning that fitted male experience over women's. Now, those of you that have read the amazing book Invisible Women will know that, sadly, patriarchy in science is all too prevalent. Shockingly, models of sexual response focused on women's experience only came to the scene in the year 2000. So let me have a little drink. Sex research, and particularly how we understand women's sexual response, has moved on. And we now know that it can be useful to think of women as starting from a position of not having desire. We call this sexual neutrality. So starting off from a position of not feeling like it, of that being normal. But that women, as well as people of other genders, have some other motivation to be sexual. Think stress relief, or wanting to feel connected, or even wanting to feel desire. Now, this motivation, which, as you can probably see, is neither a sex drive or a sense of unbridled lust, this motivation encourages us to either make advances to a sexual partner or to be open to advances if the context feels right. So only once those advances have been made and there is sexual stimuli between us, such as a passionate kiss or being naked together, might desire be triggered and make an appearance. Now, this means by reducing the amount of passionate kissing or reducing the amount of time that we're naked together or touch each other's body outside of sex, we're often instinctively doing the very opposite of what our desire might need, and curtailing any opportunity we have to trigger it. Now, when I talk to clients through this, about this newer understanding of desire, it's often a complete game changer. Not only do they realize that they're not broken, but they understand that the way they've been managing their sex lives is all wrong. And that this is perhaps the number one reason, although there'll be plenty of other things connected to it, this is the reason why sex has not been happening in the absence of a good relationship and from their eyes, seeing their partner still as attractive. Okay, so let's move on. I wanted to talk a little bit now, moving on from how desire works for all women to what's different for women who have sex with women. And there are some key differences. So myth 2, women who have sex with women's sex lives I say women who have sex with women, obviously, because I'm talking about being inclusive of whatever label women might attach to themselves, like lesbian or bi. It's a bit of a mouthful though, but bear with me. So myth 2, women who have sex with women's sex lives are not as satisfying over time as men who have sex with men or women who have sex with men. Now, let's address this one. So, despite what we've been led to believe and what you'll read about in the kind of popular press and magazines, women's bodies are not trickier than men's. And I'm sure that those of you watching this probably know more about that than a lot of women out there, because we're in a position of having sex with women. But women and men can orgasm at roughly the same rate from masturbation, which is basically most people, around 95 to 98%, can reliably orgasm on their own in just a few minutes. So gender does not come into it. Now, when women and men have sex with each other, the rate of men usually orgasming stays at 95%, so it's equitable to masturbation for them. But for women, when they have sex with men, their rate of usually or always orgasming drops to 65%, with much lower rates reported by women for casual sex with men, a depressing 18% of women having sex with men for casual sex orgasm. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of this, and it's frequently referred to as the orgasm gap. But women who have sex with other women do not see such a significant drop in orgasms when they have sex with each other. So when women have sex with other women, their orgasm rates stay very high, a rate of about 85%, i.e., the orgasm gap quickly starts to disappear when two women are together, demonstrating the impact that gender inequality has on the sex lives of women who have sex with men. So this is a good thing, something for us to celebrate. But one of the other key differences in the sex lives of women who have sex with women, in what the research tells us, is that they typically report a greater variety and frequency of sexual acts, such as receiving oral sex or clitoral stimulation alongside penetrative sex. Now, unsurprisingly, this shows itself in more orgasms, as well as higher general sexual satisfaction than women who have sex with men. Also to be celebrated is the fact that women who have sex together are also 3 times as likely as heterosexual women to have an orgasm with a partner, along with a greater frequency of multiple orgasms. So far blasting that myth out of the water. Now, orgasms are, of course, not the be-all and end-all of sex. There are plenty of other great things we can get from sex. But maintaining desire in relationships and with the same person or people is also about reward. Because for us to want to do something in the future, it has to have been rewarding in the past. And as I mentioned, there's no such thing as a sex drive. Desire isn't something that's ever present, but something that we're motivated to do, more or less, depending on the needs it meets for us and the context surrounding it. And one of those contexts is reward. And women who have sex with women have a real advantage here in that their sex lives are intrinsically more rewarding. So, all good so far. And one of the other important aspects of desire and good sex more generally is that desire, arousal, and our body's sexual response thrives on novelty and unpredictability. Now, it's common when women and men have sex together for them to fall into a set script of who does what that can get fairly fixed over time. For example, it might start with a kiss, then a bit of a fumble, then perhaps one person giving the other oral sex, then usually ends with penis and vagina penetration. And we call this expectation of how sex happens a sexual script. And research shows us that when you ask heterosexual people what sex should look like, there is a formulaic and narrow definition given which often fits this mold. But sexual scripts for women who have sex with women provide more freedom and hence more opportunity for better sex. So there's not, for example, a typical script for what lesbian sex should look like. in terms of who does what and in what order, in the same way there is for women who have sex with men. Although this is partially why women who have sex with women have higher levels of sexual satisfaction and orgasms, if you're about to have sex with another woman for the first time, the absence of this script can, of course, be a bit confusing and scary, because how do you know what you're supposed to do? Whilst largely unhelpful, one of the theories behind the idea of why we have these societal scripts is that they reduce anxiety by providing us with information about how we should behave in certain social situations. The other thing, of course, is that living in a heteronormative world, as we all do, means that however you identify in terms of sexual orientation, that doesn't stop you being continually exposed to heterosexual sexual scripts. You know, think about the majority of the sex scenes you see on TV. They're all following that set script of heterosexual sex and looking the same way. The impact of this for women who have sex with women shows itself in a different way. Firstly, by potentially leading to a sense of your sex life not fitting in, might lead to perhaps being afraid to hold hands in public, or even worse, being asked inappropriate questions about how your sex life could possibly work. I mean, who's not had the "who's the man" question? But secondly, how you make sense of how to be in a sexual relationship with another woman when our sexual scripts position men as the initiators and performers of sex with high levels of desire, and women as passive recipients, which of course we know they're not, but that's often how women are portrayed in society around sex. Now, the impact of these scripts was never more evident than during the lesbian bed death era. And if you've not heard of it, lesbian bed death was a term used colloquially, I can never say that word, colloquially, and in the scientific community in the 80s to refer to the fact that it was presumed, based on scripts, that women were inherently less sexual, low in desire, and passive sexually, that when you get two women together to have sex, they'll eventually stop having sex after a certain period of time together. And of course, we now know that this isn't true. Women in same-sex relationships have their desire works in exactly the same way as how desire works for women who have sex with men. And what this means, which is new information, is that many women in long-term relationships might report low spontaneous desire if you ask them how often they think and feel about sex out of the blue. And this in itself is not problematic. But remember, we didn't know this in the 80s. We've only known this since 2000. And that's possibly what was confusing all of these reports of lesbian bed death. And recent studies comparing the sex lives of women in same-sex and mixed-sex relationship have once and for all put the lesbian bed death myth, well, to bed, because, well, despite lesbian bed death being discredited as a phenomenon, unfortunately, it still lingers as a sexual script for women in same-sex relationships. And this really saddens me, because I think it sometimes stops women who have sex with women making changes to their sex lives when they feel unhappy about how sex is going, because they incorrectly attribute it to the start of an inevitable decline. And this is of real concern to me, because it doesn't need to be so. Please don't equate a long-term sexual relationship with giving up on your sex life. It certainly doesn't have to be. And sexual satisfaction is important to relationship satisfaction over time. So it's important to not let that go. But one of the things that we do know is that women in same-sex relationships' sexual desire is negatively affected by how impacted that woman is, or those women are, by heterosexism in society and the minority stress that that causes. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the concept of minority stress, which is a term basically meaning being part of a marginalized group and the fear of coming out or being visible in relation to being part of this group, along with the psychological toll it takes at times. And let's be honest, there are always times when you feel you need to hide who you are. Now, what this means is that for women who identify as lesbian or bi, connecting with the wider LGBT community, coming out to trusted others, and finding places to socialize and to feel safe are key, not just to mental health, but also to sexual satisfaction and desire. So I would say keep using forums like this and keep engaging with communities like this. It will really benefit your sex life in a way that you might not expect. Okay, let's move on to how you can use lockdown to save your sex life and what to do if you're in lockdown without a sexual partner. So this is an odd thing to discuss, right? Because we are living in totally unprecedented times and our usual routines have been turned upside down, and the freedoms and security we previously took for granted are no longer so. And a proportion of us find ourselves in lockdown with our partners 24/7, a situation which could be challenging for even the most harmonious of relationships. But what if this time of lockdown, as difficult and traumatic and challenging and stressful as it is, provides a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reset and refresh our sex lives? Now, before you say to me, sex is the last thing on my mind, let me quantify this a little bit. Because for a large proportion of people, it's true that sex won't be further from their minds right now. And this fits with findings from sex research, alongside, I guess, common sense. Stress and anxiety are known to reduce our sexual desire, and preoccupation with the news, worry about our finances, worry about the health of our loved ones, or even how much is in our cupboards can understandably slow the wheels of our sex life to a complete standstill. But for some of us, the opposite happens. Sex boosts our mood and increases our feelings of connection and well-being. And many of us are motivated to have sex to relieve stress, or find that we naturally feel more sexual in times of fear and anxiety. Remember, I talked at the very beginning about how we're often not motivated to have sex by lust or passion and desire. We're motivated for other reasons, and these are some of them. So for these people, desire might be on the up, and it might be an important means of coping with the current situation. So I would suggest that for the good of your relationship, those of you that are in lockdown with a partner, it's worth considering whether you know how each of you relates to sex in times of stress, and make this knowledge explicit by talking about it. Because do you know how each other's desire is affected by stress? Is that something you've ever discussed? Do you know that about each other? What if one of you sees a rise in the amount of sex that you want and the other a fall in the next few months? How will you manage that discrepancy? Now, no matter what comes from your sex life in the next few months or how challenging it might be, talking about it will definitely help. Sex science tells us that it's not wanting a different amount of sex in our partner that causes difficulties with sex and sexual frustration, but not being able to talk about it. That's the thing which delivers the knockout punch to our relationships. So this is the opportunity we have ahead of us right now. Some of us might be in the right headspace to take advantage of it. And you could be forgiven for thinking that sex should be the last things on our minds at the moment, because, as I said earlier, there is so much to worry about. But I would say that this belief is probably a consequence of how sex is positioned in our society as a kind of a frivolous recreational pursuit. And the reality is that it's anything but. Sex meets psychological and relational needs for all of us. And sexual satisfaction, as I said earlier, boosts mood, boosts self-esteem, and boosts well-being. And we know that a good sex life has been shown to act as a buffer against a drop in relationship satisfaction over time. And I think we can all agree that feeling connected to our partners and experiencing improved psychological well-being are important right now. So if you are in lockdown with a partner and you're open to using this time to benefit your sex life and have an opportunity to nourish your desire, government advice on limiting the spread of infection permitting, you could use this time to plan a daily increase in your physical intimacy to trigger desire, but importantly, with no pressure to have to feel anything as a result. Schedule a regular time each day to hang out in bed, perhaps in your underwear or naked, and talk, kiss like you did when you got together, give each other a massage. It doesn't matter what it is, it's about having physical, intimate contact. It doesn't need to be sexual contact, it just needs to be physical. And it also doesn't have to be a huge chunk of time. It could be 5 minutes, it could be a brief kiss. It doesn't need to take hours out of your day. And as I mentioned earlier, desire often follows, not precedes, this kind of circumstance. And you might be surprised by the results. Now, sex science tells us that long-term monogamous relationships bring with them the most challenges for maintaining desire, especially for women. And there are many reasons for this. One of which is the dilution of our roles as sexual partners by the prevalence of other less sexy roles. Roles like being housemates, being friends, or being co-parents. Now, many of us currently find ourselves suddenly seeing an increase in the amount of time together in our day, spent doing these kind of roles, housemate roles, friendship roles, even a new role now, perhaps, of working from home colleagues together. Now, of course, these changes are necessary and temporary, but risk squeezing out any other time we might have left to relate to each other as sexual partners. So there are some ways we can change this. Firstly, by increasing the time that we relate to each other across the day as sexual partners, which I call sexual currency. Now, sexual currency can be defined as anything that's not sex. By that, I mean any type of sexual act, but something that you'd only do with a partner. So it might look like a 5-second lingering kiss rather than a peck on the cheek. It might be a suggestive glance, a compliment, an unexpected touch of each other's bodies as you pass each other in the kitchen, for example. Now, sexual currency not only marks out and reminds you both of your role as sexual partners, and our brain really needs to associate something as sexual. And the more we dilute seeing our partner as sexual, the less desire we will feel for them. So that's important. But it's also a stepping stone to a more natural transition to more sexual ground, should you wish to. And of course, sexual currency in itself is a trigger for desire. So you've got nothing to lose by increasing your sexual currency. And the second change you have the opportunity to make during lockdown is on how you spend the time you have together. So research tells us that couples who engage in challenging, exciting, or fun activities together have more desire in the following days than couples who spend the same time together doing something else as usual. Think Netflix here. So this means that swapping out one of those evenings watching TV to cook something elaborate and challenging together, play a game, or perhaps planning where you'll go on that road trip when we can all finally travel again could be just what you need to feel connected sexually. Only you can know whether this lockdown time is fertile or barren ground for your sex life right now, and whether you use this time to nurture it or you put it on hold for the time being. One thing's for sure, your sex life is unlikely to be unaffected by what's going on. And both of those feelings, both of those directions with what you want out of your sex life are totally okay and nothing to be worried about. Okay, let's move on. I wanted to discuss the impact of lockdown on the sex lives of those of you home alone, or at least not with a sexual partner. Many of you will be facing a few months, because it's already been a month, hasn't it? And it's going to be at least 2 of having no sex with another person. And it is, of course, really important that you stick to that advice of no hookups with anyone who doesn't live in your household. This might feel really difficult to get your head around if you're someone who likes regular sex or is missing your regular sexual partners. And You might be interested to hear that one of the things that research tells us is that in the absence of being able to get that sexual fulfillment, and in times of loneliness or social disconnection, i.e. now, one of the ways that people use to manage these feelings is via what's been called sexual nostalgia. Now, this basically means reflecting on positive sexual experiences with past partners. So it's kind of different from sexual fantasies about a stranger or an otherwise imagined scenario. It's kind of a sexual memory. And interestingly, it's more common in people who particularly value and crave attachment with others. So what can you do? I mean, it's tough, and there is no denying that. My advice would be take each day as it comes and try not to focus on how long this might go on for. And in fact, that's a useful strategy for all of us in many different ways at the moment, outside of sex as well. And remember that although you'll miss out on the very real physical presence of another person during this time, it also presents opportunity in other ways. It's opportunity of creating longing for a partner that you're in a different place to, of finding new ways to connect sexually, like phone sex or sexting, of nurturing yourself outside of the relationship, which we also know is ultimately good for relationships and sex as well. So that's not something to be sniffed at. If you have a partner and you're just not physically with them, it may be that the way in which you're sexual together at the moment has changed from the physical act of having sex to other forms, things like sharing fantasies, talking about sex, or mutual masturbation over FaceTime. And all of these things provide opportunity to increase your comfort with communicating about sex, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the kind of number one indicator of long-term sexual satisfaction more than anything else. So plenty of opportunities. And you could also nurture your desire for your partners by spending time, fantasizing about that first time that you can touch each other's bodies again, which, let's be honest, will be spectacular. And those people who are in lockdown with a partner don't get that opportunity. So every cloud. And here's some other tips for those of you with no access to sex in real life with another human, but who want to focus on their sexuality in this time. So first tip is you might want to invest in some new toys. And I know that the wonderful Shush Women's Store are happy to offer some kind of discount for us around this. So I'll talk to the DIVA team about it. You might want to reset from sex and dating in this time off and spend some time considering what's important to you in your future sex and relationships. And if you want more pointers of how to do that, I have created a free workshop, which is on our website. Sorry, worksheet, not workshop. We do have workshops too, but this is in a worksheet format under the resources section. And that's on our website, which is thehavelockclinic.com, which I'm sure we'll be able to write somewhere. You might want to revisit in your sexual fantasies some positive experiences with past partners. So this idea of sexual nostalgia that we just talked about, because not only will that help you meet your sexual needs, but it will help you also manage those feelings of loneliness and social disconnection too. And it can also be useful to get in touch with the need that sex is meeting for you so that you can find other ways to meet it. Remember, I talked earlier that it's might often not be desire which prompts us to want to be sexual, but another reason or motivation. So, for example, masturbation is totally your friend and will relieve the physical urge to have sex if a physical urge is what's prompting you to crave it. But there are many others. So perhaps you're someone who craves sex to boost your mood, to feel attractive, or to connect with others. Taking a moment to reflect on these during lockdown can help you meet that need in another way. So, for example, if it's connection with another person that you're really craving, and that's making you feel like having sex, but when you reflect on it, it's actually really about just wanting to deeply connect. Then perhaps scheduling a phone call with somebody important to you to talk about something that feels, quite intimate and deep, perhaps, might go some way to meeting that need. And if it's about boosting your mood, you can experiment with other ways to do that, of course. Another thing you can do while you're kind of at home and lockdown would be to buy my book. It would be odd of me not to suggest that. It's a great read. Or you could do one of our online workshops, which are available on demand on our website, and you can do those alone and with a partner. Okay, that's probably all for me today. Hopefully I will be able to answer any questions that you have, because I'm hoping to stick around after this, and I hope you've enjoyed it. You can find me at The Sex Doctor on Instagram and Karen Gurney 5 on Twitter. And I hope to hear how you found this workshop. Thank you.